to live and breathe in the same space and time as contemporary artists makes it interesting to get their angle, rather than work in a historic museum where I could also take another perspective through objects from other times. But I think that the synchronicity of living now, working now, facing the same challenges, looking at the same world, that's what I like about it. I'm a curator. It's a word derived from Latin, to cure or to curate, to take care of something, to be a keeper of a collection. Mostly, that's the old term. And in a contemporary sense, the curator is responsible for programming exhibitions, working with objects, with artists, also living artists, obviously, and to conceive concepts for exhibitions. I grew up around art books a lot, and art was considered a universal value in my family. So that's how an interest was there in the early age. I did a lot of drawings as a kid, and yeah, we went to museums, things like that. So basically one idea that settled, and that has a little bit to do with my actual job today, is some kind of an anthropologist, or like an Indiana Jones-like figure who would go into strange places and find curious objects and uncover their secrets and mysteries and find out what they mean and where they came from. And finally, when I was a teenager, I decided I want to study art history. At the university in Vienna in the early 2000s, I basically very quickly found out that I'm not cut for academia. Vienna in the early 2000s, and the Art History Institute in particular, wasn't very contemporary oriented. So we had a very good foundation of knowing about the past, the basics, the fundamentals. There was a professor that later became the director of the institute, basically, Michael Viktor Schwarz, who had his habilitation lecture. It was called Visuelle Medien im christlichen Kult des Mittelalters in German, and I think in English it means something like visual media in the Christian cult of the Middle Ages. It was not translated as far as I know. And it was a very interesting mix of bringing together iconic church paintings of the Italian 13th and 14th century with McLuhan's medium as a message, and contemporary advertisements and the way of how images shape our world. This lecture was very important for me in my decision to move to the contemporary art spectrum more than researching the past. The contemporary as a notion became very important for me, and also because there was nothing really going on, or like there were few institutions doing shows. The MAC was one of them, basically, having really major shows of contemporary art. So all that kind of influenced my decision that I want to do exhibitions with contemporary artists, nowadays also designers, architects. But I kind of felt it's necessary that I get into it, and I want to make a contribution, and I like to do it. And also I found out that the exhibition as a medium interests me, speaking of media. So it's a way to convey meaning in other than a book or other than doing art yourself. I liked the notion of the museum as a place that's durable through time. There comes the Indiana Jones moment again, so you would then maybe in a distant future uncover a museum grown over by some plants, and still there are some, like this kind of romantic thing. But apart from the romanticism, I really think that museums play a big role in establishing a cultural notion in a society. I think there's a certain cultural relevance to objects, also from the past, obviously, or mostly. But the now, as we say, is something you're thrown into the time that you grew up in or you live in right now. There are always archaic problems that will always be there, and then there are new issues, problems, or questions that have to be asked. And I think contemporary artists, being defined as people who live in the same time period as we do, experiencing the same now, can address those issues in a certain way. And that maybe objects from 3000 before Christ cannot. It's very much about the visuality. the meaning and the aesthetics come together in the exhibition. So it's very different from a book, or it's very different from just meaning. It's hard to explain actually the idea why an exhibition is semiotically so complex. One notion of the exhibition as we know it is that it's temporary, and so it has an ephemerality to it. So it ends and you know it, and it's on in a certain time for a certain period of time. Let's say it's on in 2017 for 3 months. And then that says something about when an exhibition took place. And I really like to research the history of exhibition making and looking back at when a certain documenta took place, what was shown in it. You can't just move those exhibitions in another time. Or when some artists had their first retrospective, in which country did it take place? In which year? In which institution? It makes a huge difference. The context is very crucial. If you go about conceiving the exhibition with too much rationality, you won't get to a point, I think, of a good exhibition. So I think, professionally speaking, the subconscious or like the also emotional decisions are actually important. And I think if we want to talk about a thematic exhibition, for example, a themed group exhibition, for example, that can contain work by living artists that was especially produced for it, or work by living artists that already existed, or it can contain work by artists who are not contemporary, or even artifacts from other times or cultural contexts that would make the theme more comprehensible. Then I think there's a lot of actually subconscious decisions. The Wikipedia principle, so you would research about, say, artificial intelligence, and you then easily end up reading about shamanism and hallucinogenous drugs. But why does that happen? Because you think about how is artificial intelligence discussed about, so it comes to the human brain. If you speak about the brain, you speak about consciousness. If you speak about consciousness, you'll end up about how knowledge is perceived and learned, and there you go, you know. So that's a stream of association, basically, in research already, and it can happen that also decisions are made based on this kind of flow. I had this group exhibition titled Artificial Tears, which was entirely, I think, in the first mentioning, my boss was like, what's going on? But okay, so why is it related? And you can then develop that topic on your own and make the choice of which artists to invite or which works to show. There's always some works that I have in mind that need to be in the show. The autonomy of the artworks per se is really important to me. And I think that sometimes it is a misunderstanding, or it actually happens, that themed shows use the works of art as footnotes to the concept. And I think that's problematic. I think a mixture of having the theme, a curatorial concept, but also the autonomy of the artworks per se in mind is a good way to think about an exhibition as work. In the current discussion also about the future of human labor and work through automatization and digitalization, you really have to think about what do you work for, what do you strive for, what do you want to do, as opposed to what do you need to do to sustain yourself, to pay your rent, to buy your food, to pay for your family. So there's interesting theories by the sociologist and philosopher Frithjof Bergmann, who had this famous book, New Work, New Culture. And he suggested that in the future only 1/3 of the human labor will be wage labor.
Im Grunde genommen sind wir überzeugt, dass die jetzige Wirtschaft im Sterben liegt und auch das Sterben verdient. Und wir versuchen, dem Sterben nachzuhelfen. Also die jetzige Wirtschaft, ganz besonders die Lohnarbeit, in der Lohnarbeit sehe ich etwas, das die Menschen schwächt, das sie lähmt, dass sie alles andere tut, als den Menschen wirklich Leben zu geben, was unsere Absicht ist.
And that's something, I was a lot of concerned with for the Vienna Biennale just recently, and also thinking about my own work. I rather refer to it as work than as a job. Of course, it's a job, it's an employment situation. Thinking about art or thinking about topics that concern society or could be interesting for exhibition, or reading articles, books, or talking with people or artists over a beer about their work, or hanging out at the studio, is not limited to the job. If you have the feeling you have to check your emails at night and be on alert, then it's bad. If you can put that aside but still like to engage in topics that surround your work, then you might have found the job or work that you actually love to do. And that's something I consider to be very lucky with that, because I know a lot of people who don't like their work or their jobs, and they rather look forward to ending at, 3 in the afternoon to then go to do that, what they actually want to do. And in my case, and hopefully in many of the cultural workers' sphere, it's coming to be congruent, Maybe one of the shows that was most exciting and brought visibility and is kind of sustainably referred to just 2 days ago in Brussels again, is the show on Hans Hollein that happened in 2014 on the initiative of the Berlin-based architect Wilfried Kühn. He went to the MAC and suggested to do a Hollein show, and I was called into the project and asked by my boss if I want to contribute to be co-curator of the show. And I took that challenge because the mission was to, for the first time, work with Hans Hollein's archives. He was a little ill already at the time, shortly before his 80th birthday, and his archives that were located in his former offices in Argentinierstraße, but also in his private home and in several storage rooms all over Vienna. And it was really exciting to get to explore his work in that way, because he himself, he was not only an architect, he was a designer, artist, theoretician, and exhibition maker, actually, himself. He always engaged photographers to photograph his exhibitions and works exactly how he wanted them to be perceived. So he was basically a pioneer of the use of social media before social media was invented. With his shows, he always was part of the team. So even there was a curator, he was always only giving out the finished models or the things that he wanted to be there. So it was a manipulated way, basically. And fair enough, many artists or architects do that. But the exciting thing about that project was he agreed to give the trust that we can choose what we want to show. And we also very early on decided that it's not an architecture show, but it shows the full spectrum of his work. And we also grouped objects very widely, I would say. Some people were critical about that, but in the end liked it. To mix really design, art and architecture and concepts just by referring to anything tower-shaped will now come together, because it's fun. It's great to see it. And that was really a great experience, also working with an architect who was thinking about parcours of the exhibition very much with the architectural situations, because that's something in large exhibitions of that size, which I rather rarely get to do. It's also a budget issue, obviously. Where you have many more rooms, you have a real parcours. It's not like a group exhibition that's in one space or something. Then that's really exciting to think about that, and it adds another dimension even to exhibitions in the White Cube. So we just now had that also with the Hello Robot exhibition that was co-curated by a larger team with Vitra Design Museum and Design Museum Ghent and MAC. So there was also 4 chapters, 4 very different scenarios, as we called it, that were designed. So I think this is another level of a thematic show, very different from a group show with artists that is limited to maybe one space. You always doubt yourself. Will it work? Will the knots tie? Because that's it's one thing to think about it in theory, where you're sure that this reference and this work and this materiality or this lighting or this placement or anything together basically will then make this boom thing where everyone will know, yes, that's it. Or will at the end only you think that's it and everyone else will not know it? Or will even you not think that it's okay? You never know. So I think doubt is always useful, basically. One artist of the Artificial Tears show said to me when she was here installing her work, you know, this show is completely insane. Like what you do here, mixing this and that, and then in the end it all falls into place and it's so amazing and it's wow. And I was really like, okay, wow, that's the greatest thing someone said about this show specifically, but also about a process that I experienced with a lot of shows that I did. Also with one about the notion of islands. It was called Elsewhere, Observations on Islands. When you talk about with other people in advance about this, why do you put this and that together and what does it have to do with that? And in the end, if it then happens that it's insane and you sometimes, of course, you doubt and you find it's crazy or it's risky, but then it comes together, then that's an amazing feeling, maybe of success, of content. And also the question of, is the work finished? Then you have the feeling, yes, now that's it. But without doubt, that wouldn't be possible. Then it would be just, I think, safe or just, you know, if you don't have this anxiety, also before speeches or before panel discussions, before freaking video interviews, if you're not nervous, I'm not sure if it's going to be cool, you know. I wrote down something about Vilém Flusser, who wrote about doubt. Vilém Flusser is great, anything he wrote about basically. But he says doubt is important. It defines the relation between the notions of freedom and information. And I think that's something I lived by, or I also talked about a lot in this conversation, because that's exactly it. You have to get more angles, and then you think maybe this is better or that is better. And I don't mean indecisiveness. That's a very nasty characteristic to have. Doubt is different to indecisiveness, because on doubt you can still make a decision. You will have eventually to decide for something. You can later doubt if you made the right decision, but you made one. And that's exactly in any creative process, I think. Also exhibition making or probably art making or writing or whatever it is. You might doubt, but you have to decide to set some action, to do something. To make a decision, to go with it, to roll with it. And then either the knots are tied, or you doubt yourself and then the knots are still tied. Or you doubt yourself and you really fail, but it's fine, you know, you took it, the step. And I think without that, where would we go? And Hannah Arendt, also in The Human Condition, she writes about trust and doubt and belief and all these things you can do without being certain. So if you trust someone, you cannot know if this person will run off with your wallet, but you will still entrust this person with this object and just believe, even if you doubt, maybe I shouldn't do it, but you have to. You have no other choice than to try it, because then otherwise you won't find out. You know, what do you do?